welcome to this video where we'll be taking a look at sequential switches. I'll go over the basic concept of sequential switches, a quick rundown of the two modules, and then I'll give a variety of patch tips that can get you using your sequential switch a little bit differently. You could jump to any section of the video using the time codes now. And let's get started. So here's a quick rundown of how a sequential switch works. And the best example is this Doepfer sequential switch. We have 4 channels. There's a trigger in, which just sends the active signal to the next channel. And then a reset in brings us back to 1. We could change between 2, 4, and 3 steps. I'm going to go 4 here. And you see there's an OI on each input because it's an input or an output. So these 4 could all be individual inputs that get switched between and sent to this output. Or you could send one signal in and send it out to 4 different destinations. Just to show how the triggering works, I'm going to plug some triggers in here. This one just resets it at the beginning of each bar. And then I have a trigger in going on each one. So it's kind of acting like a sequencer here, but we have to input our own values. Or we can output to the different destinations, as I said before. And that essentially is a sequential switch. Now I'll talk about Tàin by Instruo. And this one is a little bit different. It has 2 channels that are exactly the same. I'm going to just look at the bottom one here and show you. These are also in, out, inputs or outputs. And this one, unlike the sequential switch, is buffered so it can handle volt per octave. And what we have are 2 inputs and 1 output, or 2 outputs with 1 input. Now, if you have it at 2 inputs to the 1 output, and you don't have anything patched into this one here that is connected to this little trimmer, we can add offset voltage. So we could tune that to, say, a specific note or a specific value, and it goes plus or minus either 5 or 10 volts. I don't remember, but it's pretty great. And then we have our switch between the 2. When the light is on, it's on channel 2. When it's off, it's on channel 1. And notice there's this latch switch. So right now it's latching and it's switching between them like a normal sequential switch would. But we turn the latch off and it's only on channel 2 when we have an active gate or pressing and holding the button. So that's what makes this interesting, and I'll show another trick with Tàin to make it a 3-way a little bit later on in this video. Now let's get to the patch tips. Now we're going to look at a dual bidirectional switch, the Instruo Tàin, or Tàin. I think it's Tàin, and I like Tàin because you're tying 2 signals together. So first, let's hear our sequence. And with the sequence, I'm going to adjust the root note of the sequence here with Tàin. And to increase the usability of the module, I'm actually going to tie the 2 sides together. So I'm going to put the output from 1 into one of the inputs on 2. And I'm going to take that output and send that to the root note on Bloom. And now I don't really need to add anything else here. I can manually adjust these things by using the built-in voltage with this little trimmer here. So I could turn 1 on, which is giving us this signal, and adjust the trimmer go pretty high there. Drop it down. And we also have this side's signal with the trimmer, which I could even set to go lower. And the best thing about this module is we could send triggers or gates to these inputs to sequence them to give us a longer sequence than we actually have. In this instance, I'm turning the latch off on both. Now let's add some drums into this. A bidirectional switch all tied together to change the root note of our sequence with Tàin. Another way to use a bidirectional switch, if it is buffered of course, is to use it with volt per octave sequences to send two different sequences to your oscillator. So I'm going to plug in first volt per octave sequence and the second volt per octave sequence, and I'm going to plug that out into my oscillator's volt per octave. So now when I play my sequence, we could hear our first sequence, and when I hold this, we could hear our second sequence. And I have it all sequenced to the first sequence's gate still. So it gives it that little bit of variation. And switching in between is non-destructive on your sequencer, so you can switch between all you want and it's not going to change like the position within the sequence or anything like that. So for this I'm going to plug in this gate signal to switch us between the two sequences. And that is using a bidirectional switch to switch between two sequences. Here I'll be using the Doepfer Sequential Switch to turn my chord oscillator into an arpeggio. And I'm doing this by sending the main sequence gate output into the input of the sequential switch. I'm then sending the four outputs into the trigger inputs on each channel of Carve. And I have it so each time the gate is triggered, it triggers a burst generator here, which will give me 3 bursts to send it down the sequence at a changing rate each time, so that each arpeggio or drawn out chord is going to be a little bit different. And let's see what that sounds like. So we could see we're getting our cascading gates being sent to Carve. And this is basically just sending our gate into those different outputs at different times. And it's as simple as that. Now let's add some effects to this. bass and drums. And that is chord arpeggio sequencing with the sequential switch. So now we're going to use the Doepfer sequential switch with audio to send it to 4 different destinations. I have it sending to beads for some granular goodness, shelves for some EQ filtering, data bender for some glitchiness, and then dirty laundry for some wave folding and grungy distortion. But first, let's just hear our bass drum beat. And now let's hear it through the effects. Dirty laundry, beads, shelves, data bender, and back to dirty laundry. Now let's add some synth to this. And that is using audio in a sequential switch. Now let's look at using the sequential switches as a sort of audio effect, or a stutter effect, or a kill switch with Instruo Tàin and the Doepfer sequential switch. I'm going to start with the 2-channel Tàin. And first, I'm going to give it the audio signal into the first input. And the second input, I'm going to leave empty, which is going to give us that stutter or kill switch effect. Now let's put my audio in here, play my sequence, and you can get a nice stuttering effect by tapping this, or with latching. But we don't want to be using our finger the whole time here. So I'm going to take the burst output from 2 HP bursts here and put that into the channel selector input on Tàin. And we get a nice stuttering effect, or I could latch it. And this is fun and all as an audio effect, but let's take it to the next level with, say, 3 channels with the Doepfer sequential switch. So I'm going to bring the audio over to input 1 here, and then take this output, and I'm going to trigger in again with this burst output, and I'm going to reset in with just a key step at the beginning of each measure. But we have empty channels here for 2 and 3. So for 3, I'm going to pull something interesting, and I'm going to pull the second side of rings here through some distortion and put that into channel 2 because it's stopping there. It's pretty crazy distortion. Just with the sequential switch, we have a nice, cool effect. Or we could go to 4. And those are some sequential switch patch tips. Until next time.